was great. Okay, yes. Hi. When I was coming through the airport, I went to the bathroom and I heard a woman saying to a friend, "What kind of a person even says that out loud?" And I thought, I'm going to go meet him now. I know exactly who it is. There was a bit in the section you read, and I liked it particularly when I first read it, where you say, I couldn't reinvent the novel. And the shame about the idea of not reinventing a novel. And I was thinking that you have substantially now, or you've done something damaging and transformative to it. And I was trying to think how to identify it exactly. And in this volume, more than any others, I thought the project becomes clearer and clearer. And there's a lot of stuff in it about surface and depth. There's a lot of images of surface and depth. And I was thinking that all writers, when they're trying to change a novel, are trying to get rid of some version of what they consider to be surface to reach the depth. And sometimes the surface is something like polite society or middle-class life or nationhood. But in your version, I just wanted to read 2 lines. You say, what was consciousness other than the surface of the soul's ocean? Other than small, brightly colored boats, floating plastic bottles and driftwood, waves and currents, whatever the day might bring, over a depth of several thousand meters. And I thought I couldn't remember a novelist who had thought that consciousness was the surface. Consciousness is the stuff that novels are made out of, usually. And I wondered if shame is the thing that you're bringing up from the depth, or is shame, that's the purpose of shame in these books, to try and get deeper.
Yeah. I'm a very intuitive writer, you know. And the freedom of this book was that I just could write. I could just, do it the best I could, but I could just write. So there was no thought of reinventing or doing anything new at all. And I don't think I have, but I think I got kind of close to myself. And being so close to yourself, I don't know what shame is. My first novel I wrote, it is not a self-biographical novel, but it has lots of elements, of course, of me in it. And my editor wrote the text on the back, and he called it a monument of male shame.
Right.
And I said, what? What do you mean? I wasn't aware of the book was about shame, because I am so full of shame, and that was the way I thought the world was like, But I'm very interested in shame, because that's the point where kind of the outer world and the social world enters the inner world and the inner self, and that's what's the stake in this book is the division between the inner and the outer, and the shame is the outer world, being inside of you. Right. And I come from a kind of a shame culture, I think I can say. I've been talking with my mother, who is the same. She's very shameful and very proper. I mean, she is very decent. Mm-hmm. She's never done anything wrong in her life, and that's because she's so full of shame. Right. And she told me about her mother, and she was also very...
She come from a long line of shamed
people.
It's
a cultural thing. But I think shame is a good thing. Yeah. It is. It keeps you in place, and it keeps you, you have to... It's a way of respecting other people somehow. It's a way of... but too much of it is dangerous almost, because it restricts you so much. The man I was reading about there is, he's exploding. That's because it's taking everything in, and shame on everything. So you hardly can move, hardly can maneuver.
But what interests me, just from the process of how it was written, is I do believe you that it's intuitive, but there's so much art theory hidden in it. And I wonder what comes first. Like, for instance, the bit you read, the masturbation scene, which is so incredible, this shameful confession of putting a book down your pants, going down to the bathroom. But inside it is also the idea, like, quite challenging to art theory, that art isn't a separate place, that it's part of the human, that a beautiful picture by Titian could also be used for an erotic purpose, which was always, I mean, we're from the similar generation, academically. And I remember those arguments being made about art and art being separate from the erotic realm. So I think a lot of writers wonder how conscious it is when you're passing through these clearly theoretical arguments.
Many of those are, because when I went to university, and it was all about art being, as you said, what's the word in English? Is separated,
right.
or, you know, and I believed in that, and I read about that, and I was thinking my own writing in that way, and so on. But when I wrote this book, it was like a very liberating act.
Yeah.
And it was like coming back to myself how I was before I started to
right.
study. And this scene, it did happen, I remember it very well.
Yeah.
But it's still, when I wrote it, it's of course funny,
Yeah.
just because of that, because a way of taking art completely down, you know, to
Yeah.
the lowest level. And it does belong there,
Yeah,
too.
it belongs there. But
Yeah.
it reminds me of that, you know, like that Terence quote, "Nothing that's human is alien to me,"
No.
which I think during that period in the 80s, 90s of theory madness, it disappeared, no? And also the idea that language was reality. There was nothing else but language. And that argument, first of all, made books that were very concerned with their language, you know, this very elaborate language.
Yeah.
And your books seem to me to be making this ancient argument that there is something outside of language in people.
Yeah.
Something that can't be contained by language. And so the language is kept like that surface of a pool.
Yeah.
Very, very plain.
I was read The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson,
Right.
and there's a beautiful quote there in the beginning of the book. She's quoting two Wittgenstein quotes.
Yeah.
And the one is the famous one that, you know, what you can't talk about, you have to be silent.
Right.
The other one is that what you're talking about, what you can't say, is contained inside of it, you know. And I think that's the hope, and for everybody who writes, that's what you want, you know.
Right.
Just hoping that it will be something there, because there is, the representation is, you know, it's really is, you know, that there is so much that can't be represented. And there is, yeah, if you read the most advanced poets, it's like they are, you know, and this is a very banal thing, but like they are at the end of the language, and
Yeah.
and kind of you can look into life, how life really is,
Right.
you know. And yeah, and I think the whole academic way of thinking is, you know, to isolate
Right.
thinking, isolate objects. It's not like that at all. I mean, we are percepting everything, even you know, reading Adorno or whoever. We feel something, but
Yes,
all the
there's
feelings are
always a
just separated. And that's a very conscious thing in the
Right.
book, that these things are the same. It is possible to think about, you know, Adorno when you are buying things in the supermarket,
Right.
or it's like they exist at the same level.
And also to name emotions with their most simple terms, which I think was really difficult to do for a kind of intellectual generation. To say, I am sad when I'm sad. Or sometimes there are moments in the text where there's just almost a primal cry. It's just, ooh, or ah.
Yeah.
Things that it would have seemed impossible, at least when I was young, to write down.
That was the hardest part of writing.
Right.
My struggle is because having been, you know, studied this at university and having read all these books and having this as an ideal, my ideal of good writing, that's, you know, the death of Virgil.
Right.
The first page is there. It's so good, you know.
Yeah.
And having that as an ideal, and then writing this, you know, just down there, it was so hard and so shameful.
It's the risk of looking like an idiot. No,
yes,
this is
exactly,
it.
and that's
it's a
the
huge risk.
That's
Yeah.
the risk.
It's
I
a
mean,
risk.
and that's what, again, with you know, university, that risk of being laughed at is eliminated, because there is a language, you don't laugh at that language, you know. But doing this thing was very risky and very dangerous, and I felt this is so bad, you know, all the time when I was writing, exactly because of that,
Right.
you know. But it's the same time, it was true to me somehow, so it was a big...
But then how do you feel about character? Because I know from talking to you in other circumstances that there are lots of novels that you love that are very different in style from your own, that have a different perspective. But here and there in book 5, the idea of character, as in not the self, not the I, but everybody else, is questioned. There's a page where you say, the young Karl Ove says, why write about why so-and-so divorced so-and-so or hurt somebody else, or why have these situations, what's the point of them? And I wondered about that because in this perspective, characters exist only in the way that they affect you, no?
Yeah.
They are like emanations. They make you feel sad, they make you feel happy. Or do you believe it's possible to write fiction from the other perspective where characters are in some sense separate from the world? Or separate from the narrator?
Yeah, I do. I think, I think, to be completely honest, I think that's the greatest art, to make that happen. I do think so. I think it's much more easy to write about yourself or from that perspective. So a novel like, Madame Bovary, for instance, is very good. And if you read,
quite good, yeah.
And if you read, if you read his letters,
yeah,
which I did a few years ago, they are obscene. They are very direct.
Yeah,
they are
like
kind
Joyce too, no?
And it's like that is his life, and it's very much alive. But it hasn't the relevance that his book. His letters is like backstage, and this book is like something different. It's a kind of crystallization, and I think that's the.
But at one point, Karl Ove charts a journey between early Joyce, like Stephen Hero, where the character is separate from the story, up to Ulysses, where the story is beautifully put, like streams through the character.
Yeah.
And then to Finnegan's Wake, where language streams through everything.
Yeah.
And is that your ideal, that arc, that you end in that place where language is streaming through everything? Because you haven't gone, that's not where these books go.
No, it's not. I have gone in the opposite direction, tried to make something very small and separated from everything. I've done that for a year now. No, but I have a very good friend of mine. He's a novelist. He's a Norwegian novelist, and he's probably the best Norwegian novelist for a couple of generations. But it's impossible to translate him because his language is so innovative and specific, And he's wild. I mean, it's really, really wild. And I was interviewing him once for a magazine, and he said his idea of the perfect novel was that, you start here, and then you go on, you come to different places, and you go on. And then, in the end, kind of the book should be on Chinese, and the reader should know how to read Chinese just by reading it, And I think that's the kind of idea, to change things, that things just happens and it goes on, and you are at a complete different place.
Yeah, I'll do that next time.
Yeah.
That's my plan.
But he has the wildness has a common with Joyce. Joyce was also very wild, and that's the good thing about him, I think.
I want to ask you a little bit about children and language, because I was thinking about the idea of our real selves or some deep version of ourselves not being represented in language. I always feel it most extremely at dinner party. Everybody's talking. I'm sure you all have it, right? And you have this deep despair that you're entirely unrepresented as a self at this dinner party. It's just people are talking, and you want it's like a primal scream goes on inside. But when you have children, I just become very aware, having them, that you are part of the original sin. You're creating language for them. You help them make it, and you see this kind of wild thing become a citizen and a person. And I just wondered what influence having children had on your ideas about making a person, the relation between language and a self.
No. Yeah, that's a very good idea for a novel. No, it's almost unbelievable to see. I have this young daughter. She's 2 now, but it's just a year ago she couldn't talk. She didn't say anything, and now the other day she was waking up and she shouted to me, "Dad, the moon!" It was such an amazing moment, because then she's situated in the world and in history and all of humanity in those 2 words. And so I feel like language is very strongly, when I was writing this book too, that it doesn't belong. We feel strongly that the language is mine, it's me, but it isn't. It's just something we grow into and die away from. And my children speak Swedish, that's very strange too. They can't speak Norwegian, can't speak my language, No, I have no idea. I had another experience with children and language. My oldest daughter, she came over to me and had written something, and she wanted me to read it. And it was opening of a novel, and she's like 12, and it wasn't that it was so good I was amazed, but it was the experience of what she was writing about. I couldn't imagine that she was experienced this, you know. So I had to Google it to see if it was really her that had written it before I went in to talk to her. But it was
family plagiarism. Check runs through. Yeah.
Yeah, but then, you know, the thing was that she had showed something completely different than she shows, you know, in every other, and that was through language somehow. And language for me is a way of escaping mostly and basically, and this is all, you know, also exploring, finding out things. Language is defining the whole world, you know. So if you have a different language, your world is different.
Would you consider it a good sign if your children wanted to be writers? I mean, how do you feel about writing now? There's so much fury and sadness and shame about the whole practice in this book, but has it brought you some joy now at this end?
The writing?
Yeah,
it does. Yeah, it's no, but I think before I thought if they want to be writers that I've failed, you know, as a father.
That's what I think. Yeah.
There's no other reason for them to write than
something's gone very
out of
wrong.
failure.
Yeah.
But then I was also thinking, but maybe that's good. I mean, maybe not the ultimate goal is to be, you know, happy, having a good life. Maybe the whole thing is that you have a troubled, difficult life, living it, you know, like full.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the thing. But then again, I don't want that for my children. I want them to be happy.
Yeah.
But you can never know. I mean.
But that's interesting to me, the uses of happiness. When people have children, they're so preoccupied with this idea of a happy childhood. And yet all of the things they admire, the art they love, the music they listen to, come from exactly the opposite experience. Like, we have no language to talk about the uses of misery.
No.
Well, maybe you found one here, actually. I want to ask you also about music, because a lot of writers have a sentimental feeling for music as exactly the thing which is beyond language, maybe, and has some more direct relation to that depth inside us.
Yeah.
Is that how you feel about it? Would you, in an ideal world, would you rather have been that drummer? Actually, I don't know if drummers have a special insight to depth, but a musician generally.
No, I wouldn't. I have to be honest. I couldn't imagine anything else than to write, really. Right. But when I was, 16, 17, 18, I really wanted to do it. But I think musician, I think that's, it's such a, it's so much about presence, and my life is so much about not being present, So it's, it's a good.
But I think a lot of young writers, young people, they look at you and think that the thing which you've achieved is the creation of that writerly ego. You are a writer, that is your identity. But my sense about you and about the books is that it was escaping that identity and that idea which allowed you to write.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's quite hard to explain. I mean, with my students, I find that hard to explain because everything on the surface looks to be the opposite. They just consider it a hypocritical position, but it is true somehow. Yeah,
I think so. That was the meaning of the last sentence of the book. That is, that I'm so happy that I no longer are an author.
Right.
And that was the thing. I wanted all the books to end there because this is a book about life and literature and writing and all of that.
It's so counter to an American idea of what identity is meant to be. It's not meant to be freedom from a persona. It's meant to be having a persona, having an identity, or having a very specific way of describing yourself.
Yeah, but I think we started this by talking about shame, and that's kind of a key here, isn't it?
Maybe Americans seem a bit less full of shame. Is that fair to say? Maybe a little bit.
I don't know.
All the shame is deeper. Maybe everyone has the same amount of shame. But there's a pride in the sense of being a person. And here we have 600 pages of cringing at the idea of being a person.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, has writing them brought you the freedom that the book seems to be so obsessed with? Freedom from thinking of yourself as a person, wondering what other people think of you, all of the ways we construct selves.
Yeah, a little bit it has, but not, you know, not very much. Not in my personal circumstances, it's exactly the same. It hasn't liberated anything.
Right.
But it had liberated other things. And what I discovered there is that, you know, it's easy to write. And that was kind of a discovery. So now I still work very, very, very much. I'm like a workaholic, and I do that, of course, because I want to escape from something. Right. So I use writing to get away from myself, and I've always done that. And that's a good reason as other reasons, I guess.
And can you have any relation with the other end of it, with the reader? Like, do you think about your effect on them, or writing as a gift to a reader, or can you not think about readers at all? I can't think in those terms myself, but when I meet readers and I can see they are affected, I mean, people can cry when they meet me because there is something my books have evoked in their life, right.
And I want to tell that to me. Then I mean, that's the best thing that can happen to a writer, of course. But I never think of the reader when I'm writing. Right. That's impossible. I guess you don't do that either.
I think sometimes of the reader, but it's a crippling thought. I try not to have it too much. I love readers, I mean, but you know, not when I'm
that's
working.
Afterwards, right? Yeah.
I remember when we first met, I think at that point you were saying, and we decided that you would not write again after these books. The opposite has proved true. Do you know why?
Yeah, when I stopped writing, it was very hard to do it, and I did it. You know, I wrote very much, so I was relieved for like a few days. But then it was like a sorrow, you know, like I've lost something, like I was almost like someone was dead. Yeah. And I don't know what that is, but I think it is, you know, the state of selflessness. I remember I heard an interview with Anne McEwen, and he used that word. That's the gift when, as a writer, there is a certain selflessness in the writing, and I think that's the thing I want, you know. Yes. Not to be aware of myself, not to be, you know, it's almost like it had nothing to do with me at all. It's just a state of mind where you are. I don't know what you is, but you are.
I read a line by, I think it's Josh Rothman at New York, which I've read a lot of people writing about these books, but he said this beautiful thing, I thought, about an autobiography written not from the perspective of the person writing it, almost. Like not in sympathy with oneself. Like when we write about ourselves, usually we're on our own side, trying to present a certain picture, trying to defend ourselves against attack, and that's what's unusual about it, that on the one hand, you have this autobiographical, apparently narcissistic project, but somehow the self isn't in there. There's something similar happens with Dylan, no, for example. Thousands of words, but no Dylan in there. Mm. That's not a question, I'm sorry.
No.
What else do I have to ask you? I don't know. One thing. My husband wanted me to ask, and it's the most boring and stupid question, but it bothers both of us. When you sit down, I tested him. I said to him, can you remember Tuesday, 1997, you know, May 5th? Give it a go. And it's so, try it. It's so hard to do that his argument is that the entire thing is fiction in the same way we write fiction. It's a fictional, unless you're going under some kind of meditative moment. You place yourself in the room, think of the carpet, think of the walls. I mean, there are moments here when you see a drop of ink or a piece of coffee on a table, tiny elements. How is that done?
Yeah, it is done exactly as fiction is written. It's exactly the same thing. It's like I have been writing fiction, and I have been writing, you know, about memories, and it's the same kind of processes. But the details are, of course, invented. I mean, the coffee things are invented. But the thing is that when I start to write about things, it's like it comes more and more comes back. So,
like when you get the logo on somebody's T-shirt, are there moments when it feels Well, it's just your brain telling you one way or another, no? Your brain could tell you this is a fictional detail, or your brain could tell you, oh, he was certainly wearing the Coke T-shirt.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that nobody protests about the details.
Oh, really?
No, they don't. But they do protest a lot of what they was been saying or what the situation was like when it's present. But when the further you go back, in a childhood book, there's no protest at all. They all, accepted everything.
Like false memory syndrome, like you've
but that's also a subject in the book. It's like there's a lot of doubt about memories all the time, and that they're deceiving you, and you are inventing things to protect yourself, and that I know that happens.
So is there something a little violent about being the victor of the family memory system? Like most of us in families, it's a constant battle. You meet for Thanksgiving, someone remembers one thing, someone remembers another. But if you've published 6 volumes, you win that argument. Or you replace them. Do you think you've done that in part? That they're a version, your version, like the child's desire to have their version?
Yeah, because when it's fixed, that's the thing.
Right.
Normally it's just, floating and... But I have to say my father's family, they kind of... they said, straight out that this, you are lying, this didn't happen, And being in this zone where you don't really know what's memory, what's invented, and this was related to my father's death, which is, that was the reason for the book to be written, and they said, no, he didn't die that way. He didn't die in a house full of bottles. There were maybe a few bottles, but it wasn't like that. He was perfectly healthy, and he died of a heart attack. And the grandmother was, it was completely the opposite of the book. And I started to doubt it, more and more. And there was also this element, have I used my father to, used him and added something to make myself interesting and to write a good book? Right. That's also a possibility,
Because there's that feeling throughout the book of like a Dostoevskian, like you've killed someone. At one point you say, it's not like I killed someone. And there's a kind of disconnect between your guilt and what's actually happening. Nothing so shameful is happening apart from your version of your story is being told. I thought that maybe all of us feel a bit like a Dostoevskian murderer if we say, this is what my family was like, against everybody else's counter-version.
Yeah. No, but there is a lot of guilt in the book, of course. And I do feel like I've killed someone, and there is a transgression writing about other people, and it is terrible. And I won't, advise anyone to do it unless you really, really, really have
hate
to.
Hate your mother,
or hate your family, But I didn't write bad about them, but I wrote about my father and his faith. But then, this is the irony of this book, because this is about literature and life, was that while I got these letters, and this was also public, this was just an invention, I got a letter from one of the persons that she said, I was sitting reading a book about a house and a dead person in the house, and I realized I have been in that house. And she was the one who entered with the ambulances, to my father, and she wrote to me and she described it, and she said it was even worse than your descriptions. Right. And it was like, it was such a relief, because I really, really, really doubted myself and what I'm doing, and it was terrible. And I put that in book 6, and then I haven't heard from anyone.
Oh, really? Confirmation.
But it doesn't mean it was good of me to do it, because it wasn't. But it's still, I wasn't, inventing it. It was true somehow.
I think to write requires some kind of risk, and that's the risk of these books. Personal risk as well for you. We're out of time, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.